Good morning. It's so good to be with you here this morning. It is great to gather in His name each Sunday. We are continuing on in the story, and hopefully you had a chance to read the chapter this week. And let's just dive right in here. There are warning signs everywhere. And there are labels on things. We talked about these labels a few weeks ago. You remember the stroller and some of these things that have these bizarre labels and warnings. But there really are these warnings all around us. And we tend to ignore them because so many of them are like those. They're unnecessary. I had another funny one that came up yesterday. I was out fishing with a friend of mine. And one of the things he was using for bait, I was kind of looking through his tackle box. And I pulled out this little jar. And it said, salmon eggs, trout bait. And then in even bigger letters underneath it said, not for human consumption. So I just put them back. It's just, there's just unnecessary warnings, and these warnings that come up, and sometimes they might be serious, but probably not, and so we just kind of leave it, okay? Now, I want you to raise your hand because I think there's going to be a lot of them. If you have ever, I'm going to say been in, but probably owned a vehicle where the check engine light was just on all the time. Yeah, right. So like everyone, right? It's like there's two kinds of people in this world, okay, with the check engine light, okay? There's two kinds. There is oh man, the check engine light is on. I got to go to the mechanic like now. And then there's the rest of us, okay? Probably everyone here who raised their hand, and you just need a roll of electrical tape. Not even a roll, just a little piece. About the size of your thumbnail or the size of a check engine light. All right, gone. That is taken care of. But there's just warnings all around us, and a lot of them just don't mean anything, and so we just ignore them. We don't stop and give them much attention, right? But ignoring some warnings can really go badly. And because we're so saturated with them, it's hard to know which ones, but I'm telling you, we find these ones and they turn out bad. I mean, but there's just so many. I mean, again, I won't get you to raise your hands this time just because I know it's everybody. Anybody here ever agreed to terms and conditions that you didn't read? Okay? If you've ever logged into a Wi-Fi at a department store, okay, you have done this. And again, we just deal with so many warnings that we just tend to ignore all of them. And unfortunately, there are some important ones along the way. In the Old Testament, God sent warnings to His people through the prophets. And you were reading, if you read the chapter this week in chapter 15, you were reading about some of these prophets. And over the next several weeks, we're going to talk about more of these prophets of the Old Testament. Now, prophets, they were sometimes called seers, or they were called watchmen, or they were called announcers, and they were called upon to announce the message that had been given to them by God. And more often than not, that message was a warning. It was hey, stop doing these things that we told you not to do forever ago. Stop sinning in these ways, or things are going to go badly for you. It's kind of change, or else these things will happen. And so they gave warnings to the people about destruction that was coming. He said, you need to stay away from these things. In 2 Chronicles, in the Old Testament, now, if you're turning, which I hope that you are, we are going to be in 1 Kings again, but in 2 Chronicles 36, 15 to 16, it says, the Lord, the God of their ancestors, sent word to them through His messengers again and again, because He had pity on His people and on His dwelling place. But they mocked God's messengers, despised the words, and scoffed at His prophets until the wrath of the Lord was aroused against the people, and there was no remedy. Okay, past the point of no return, and then the wrath was poured out. But before that wrath came, before tragedy struck, God would warn the people. Before sin took over and it was too late, he would warn them. But for the Israelites, it was just like my kids when we're getting ready in the house in the morning. Nobody listened. Nobody listened. And so in 1 Kings, we see this nation is split in two. We talked about that last week. We have the northern kingdom, we have the southern kingdom. And the first king of the northern kingdom, you remember, was Jeroboam. And Jeroboam didn't want people going down to Jerusalem in the southern kingdom to worship. And so he just went into the old U-Haul storage locker and pulled out a couple of the idols that were supposed to be destroyed years ago. And he said, here, just come worship these. You won't have to travel. Just stay here and worship these instead. Yeah, it was a bad plan. We talked about how that was a bad plan. And so what we are seeing now in the kingdom, or these kingdoms, is really similar to what we saw with the judges. It's this downward spiral, because each king just got worse and worse, just like the judges got worse and worse. And so eventually, if, again, you're turned to in 1 Kings, if you're in 1 Kings, turn to chapter 16, and we'll pick it up in verse 29, and we see eventually Ahab becomes king. And it says, in the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, Ahab, son of Omri, became king of Israel. And he reigned in Samaria over Israel 22 years. Ahab, son of Omri, did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of those before him. So again, it just gets worse and worse. So Ahab's wife, Jezebel, the first one, you may have noticed the name came up a few times, princess of the Sidonians, set up idols to her gods. Baals, Baals, and many prophets were killed. And so God has had enough. And so the prophet Elijah hears from God, and he's told, you have to go to the people and confront them in their adultery, because being a prophet was like a super fun job. And so that's what he got to do. And so Elijah goes to Ahab. And again, you need to understand, again, this super fun job, prophets were not like super welcome before the king. So like as a king, when you're ruling along, and then you see one of God's prophets like coming down your driveway, because that's how I picture it in my mind. It wasn't, oh, good, here's Elijah. I bet he has good news. This is probably like an everything's going good visit, because of all of those from the prophets in the Bible. And so, of course, nobody likes to be confronted in their sin. And so here he is, King Ahab, and along comes Elijah. He says, as the Lord God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain for the next few years except for my word. So what he's coming to tell Ahab is, hey, everything's not okay, and there's not going to be any rain. Not only is there not going to be any rain, but there won't be even dew in the morning. I'm talking it's going to be dry, dry, dry. And everyone will know that the Lord is God. And so the theme of what's going on here is idolatry. Okay? It's idolatry. In fact, idolatry is a huge theme in the Old Testament. It's like number one problem. Okay? There's over 1,000 verses dealing with idolatry. Even the first two commandments. Love the Lord your God and serve Him only. No idols. Have we talked about this yet? God takes it seriously. See, the story and the Bible is about the glory of God. And idolatry is taking glory that belongs to God and giving it to someone or something else where it's not supposed to go. And as it turns out, God has a big problem with that. Now, here's the thing about idolatry in the Old Testament, is that it comes up again and again, and we read it again and again, and we kind of skip over it, or maybe we just kind of skim past it, because the whole idolatry thing, like the idols, it doesn't really apply to us, right? I mean, it's just a little too primitive. I mean, I'd be willing to bet that nobody woke up this morning and as you were deciding of whether or not you were going to come to church and engage in worship, or whether you were going to tune in online and engage in worship, you weren't sitting there going, okay, do I worship God Almighty, or should I go find a stick and whittle it into something and worship that instead? Or maybe I could go whole hog and I could get some blacksmithing gear and I could really work up, a really cool idol and I'll just worship that. Nobody thought that. Nobody here this morning thought that. And if you did think that, then come see me and we got to get you somewhere. It's just too primitive. Again, we're not like that, right? We're not like the Israelites in that way, right? But we really are the same. I mean, that's what we've been finding. We look at the Israelites and we look at the goofy things we do, and we can kind of pretty well always find some parallel, and loved ones today is no different. Our idols just look different. And it really just comes down to, where do you put your hope? Or where do you run for refuge? Or who gets the glory? Okay, is it entertainment? After a long day at work, you just cannot wait to plunk down in front of the TV and just decompress and get your comfort and your peace there. Can it be in a spouse or in a dating relationship, that person, I just have to have that person and they complete me, and you just put all your eggs in that basket? Or can it be money? And you don't have to have a whole bunch of it. In fact, you don't have to have any of it to make it an idol. Okay, it can be the striving for that security, or it can be just raising it up in satisfaction, that I just have to have my bottom line be above this number, or I just cannot cope or handle it. It can be even your career, right? I mean, a lot of us just find our identity in what we do. Okay? I can make ministry an idol. Okay? I could actually put how I go about trying to serve God and lead a church above the God who I'm supposed to be serving. It's a real temptation. It's when we rob God of His glory. And sometimes it's hard to spot. And so there's a guy, David Clarkson, who has a handful of questions. These are reframed a bit, but these kind of help us identify if there's areas where we are maybe taking attention that is due to the Lord and giving it somewhere else. And one is, what are you most disappointed with? Okay, is it your career or your finances, your family relationship, marriage? What is your hope in? Or what do you complain about the most? Here's another one, is what do you sacrifice your time and money for? There's a lot of weight there. Is it for a person, or is it for a job? Is it for some sort of hobby, like a car or a home or a second home? Wherever your treasure is, there your heart will be also. If you've got something that just gets a ton of, or most of, your time and money, you should assess what that is. Here's another question. What do you worry about? What keeps you up at night worrying? Any worriers out there? I'm a worrier. Not good. Doesn't do anything except for stress you out. But we're good at it, right? I mean, some of us are really good at it. If I lost this, or if this happened, then what? Here's one for you. Where do you go when you're hurt? When you're hurting, where do you go? To the fridge? For food? Or for drink? Do you go to your computer? Or is there a certain website or type of websites that pull you in? Or maybe just in front of the TV? There's a lesson, we've talked about this, and we unlearn it and we need to relearn it. Where do children go when they get hurt? They just go to the greatest good that they know. Mom and Dad. All right? When we're hurt, we ought to go to the greatest good that we know. Okay? God, our Father. Here's another one. What makes you mad? What makes you mad? Your favorite sports team that you have the sad misfortune of cheering for? That one resonates a little bit. When you're disrespected? Or maybe what brings you the most joy? And again, in that vein, these are probably good gifts that come from God, but we should not elevate the gift above the giver of those gifts. Whose applause do you live for? When it comes right down to it, loved ones, is an idol is anything or anyone other than God that takes the passion, the value, the hope, and the glory, and the commitment of your life. And what you end up realizing is that eventually what you have is a cheap substitute. Because we look for in these things what only God will give and what only God can provide. And when you have God and you have the substitute, there's no comparison. Okay, I'll give you a little idea of what I mean. Okay, I don't know if you can tell what that is. Anybody tell what that is? Tartar sauce. Okay, this is important. Jovi, my daughter Jovi and I, we know this. Okay, you have to have good tartar sauce. Okay, it doesn't have to be the most expensive, but it has to be good. And there's only two categories. There is like the good and acceptable, and then there's like dog food. Okay? And so we had a fish fry a few weeks ago. It was the first one of the season, so it was kind of impromptu. You're not really prepared. And you know, it was a couple families involved and a couple jars of tartar sauce, and yet we still missed it somehow. Okay? It didn't go well. Okay? So your kind of go-to is, this is kind of whitewashed out here, so to help you. So we've got, on the one side, we've got Kraft. Okay? That's good. Okay? We didn't have that. It didn't work out. We had to go with no tartar sauce. Because what we did have was Heinz. Okay? Heinz is gross. Okay? They make really good ketchup. Excellent ketchup. Probably the best ketchup in the world, but not tartar sauce. Their tartar sauce is not good. And then we're like, oh, well, we have another one. And then it was, I don't know if it was Compliments or President's Choice, but you know what I mean? It was like that brand. Okay? It was like, I think it was made out of real tartar. Oh, that was gross. Should not have said that. So it's just like, have you ever had President's Choice tartar sauce? All right? It's why we have prime ministers. Okay? It's no president would choose this. Okay? It's not good. It's not good. Okay? What I'm saying is, you just can't substitute it. Okay? And if it makes that big a difference, and it does, with tartar sauce, okay, you have to have the Lord in His right spot. Okay? No substitutes. Because it just doesn't work. It will not work. It has not worked, and it will never work. But we surround ourselves with these cheap substitutes. And then you just kind of get used to it until all of a sudden there's that feeling in your chest that you can't reconcile because something's missing, something doesn't fit, and something's not right. And whatever it is that you have in that place, you just all of a sudden realize it's not enough, and it will never be enough. Because it's God that belongs in that seat. And all of a sudden, somehow, you realize that you have settled. And you have settled for less. And you have settled for something that is never going to bring you where you wanted to go. And so God speaks through the prophets. He warns them about a drought that is coming. No rain. No dew. Then you'll know. Then you'll understand who God is and where He belongs. And so they're caught up with Baal, B-A-A-L, the weather god, the god of rain. And so God is withholding blessing in this area because of who has been elevated to God in this area. Okay, so Baal has been elevated to God's status. They worship the god of rain, and so God withholds the rain. So here's a question, is what's the drought in your life? Where is there drought in your life? Because God will place himself in direct competition with it. What I'm saying is that God will not bless anything that you put in His seat. If in the room of your life, if the big chair is for God and you've got something else there, whatever is sitting there is in competition with God, and you don't want to be in competition with God. So if you've got your job in the big seat, guess what God is not going to bless? If you have your family and relationship or your finances or what have you, don't put that stuff in competition with God. It doesn't work because God wants that seat. He wants the attention of His people because He knows that that's best, and He knows that's the only way it works out. And He does that because He loves us. And that's why so often when we release that part of our life, when we release that job, when we release that relationship, when we release those finances to the Lord, isn't it funny how He steps up and He steps in when everything is in its proper place? And so, to show the might of the Lord, Elijah said, hey, this is how it's going to go. And he says to Ahab, hey, why don't we set up a little competition? Those are fun. And so this is how it goes down. If you're still in 1 Kings, turn to chapter 18, and we'll pick it up in verse 19. It says, now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel, and bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. So Ahab sent word throughout Israel and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. Elijah went before the people and said, how long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, then follow Him. But if Baal is God, then follow him. But the people said nothing. They said, here's God on one side, here's Baal, the god of weather, on the other side. What's your opinion? Which one's the one? They said nothing. Why? Why? They wanted both. That's why. They wanted God, the Lord of Israel, and they wanted Baal. Isn't that true for us too? Isn't that what we do? It's not that we don't want God. Nobody here is going to say, well, I don't want God. I just want this other stuff. And I want to do this other stuff the way I want to do it. And if God could just kind of put His weight behind what I'm doing. We don't say it that way. But that's what we're wanting to do. And I'm here to tell you, loved ones, God doesn't share. Not like this. And so the question becomes, who is God? And that's the question to them, and that's the question to us. And we have to decide. And they had to decide. So we pick it up in verse 25 to 28. It says, Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose one of the bulls and prepare it first. Since there are so many of you, call on the name of your God, but do not light the fire. So they took the bull given to them and prepared it. And they called on the name of Baal, giving from morning until noon. Baal, answer us, they shouted. There was no response. No one answered. And so they danced around the altar that they had made. And at noon, I like this part, Elijah began to taunt them. Shout louder, he says. Surely he is God. Perhaps he is in deep thought, or maybe he is busy or traveling. I don't know where God's travel, but maybe he was. Maybe he is sleeping and needs to be awakened. So they shouted louder, and they slashed themselves with swords and spears, as was their custom, until their blood flowed. And again, we look at these people and we say, they're nuts. I mean, these people are crazy. And then again, are we so different? I mean, we bleed for our gods too. I mean, at the altar of alcohol, there have been people who have given every bit of themselves. everything that they ever had and laid it there. At the altar of sexual pleasure or instant gratification, people have laid their intimacy and ability to achieve it. They have laid their marriages and their families right there. At the altar of TV and the internet, many have placed their children. Elijah does his part to show who God is. Pick it up in verse 36 and 37. It says, Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and I am your servant, and I have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again. He says, God, do this for your glory, not for me, but for your glory. Verse 38, then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, the soil, and licked up the water in the trench. When the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, the Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. Idolatry. And again, we look at it as like it's this soft idolatry because we're not bowing down at some random statue, but it counts. Whatever you have in direct competition with God, no matter how good it is, whether it is a virtue or a vice, it's not just offensive. It's wrong, it's sinful, and it's hurtful. And we see Elijah had to carry that out. And again, hopefully you had a chance to read the chapter and you saw other prophets who had just as much fun, like Elisha and Amos. It was not a fun gig being a prophet. Exceptionally no fun. Later on is Hosea. I don't know if you're familiar with Hosea. If you are having a good day and want to wreck it, go ahead and read that. Hosea, man. When the Lord, He didn't just get them to bring these messages. Sometimes He used them for illustrative purposes. And so, if you look at the prophet Hosea, God instructs him. He says, I've selected a wife for you. Her name is Gomer. Oh, and by the way, she's a prostitute, and so you'll have to go purchase her. So he goes. He listens to the Lord. He finds her, and he buys her, and he takes her home, and he marries her. And then one day he can't find her. Maybe she's gone back to her old life. Surely not. And so he goes to look for her, and sure enough, she's leading another man into a house of prostitution. And Hosea's like, God, I did what you told me to do. And look what's happening. I did exactly what you said. Now what do I do? Go and buy her back. Go buy her a second time and bring her home. Why? Why? Chapter 3 of Hosea, verse 1. The Lord said to me, go and show love to your wife again, though she is loved by another man and is an adulteress. Love her as the Lord loves the Israelites, though they turn to other gods and love sacred raisin cakes. So the people will know that I love them. We look at that one single situation with Hosea and Gomer and think, oh my goodness, How could he go back and get her again? Yeah. Just take a moment and figure out who you and I are in the story. And then appreciate a God who has that kind of capacity. Not just to love you, but to send for you, to fight for you, to go into places that are unholy, to go to places where it doesn't make sense, to get you and rescue you and bring you back. Because of His amazing love for you and you specifically. We hurt God again and again, not putting Him in His right place, and He still says, I love you and I want you back. The prophet was God's warning system, and idolatry was an issue, and it's still an issue, and God is still jealous for your heart and the hearts of His people. He's jealous for you and the passion that you have for your favorite team, or for decorating your home, or for your golf game. He is jealous of the passion that you have for your career, or for your car, or for your clothes. He is jealous of the time and attention and resources and affection that we give those things when they are not in their proper place and proportion. And God is warning us that unless those things are put in their right place, and He is put in His right place, that a drought is coming. The story of Israel, again, is seen through the eyes of Hosea, who married Gomer even though she was a prostitute. Even though you give your heart to another, even if God hasn't been what has been most important in your life for a while, He's not given up on you. He still loves you. He still wants you. And He's still fighting to win your heart. He wants to have a relationship with you. And so I implore you, I beg you, seek Him. Put Him in His right place. Look for Him. Look to Him and listen to that still small voice. And love the Lord your God with all your heart, and serve Him only. No idols. Let's pray together.